What is going on, everybody? I am Jabby Kuwait, joined by Andrew Flash Gordon.
What's up?
We've got a film theorist video in front of us. Film theory, Disney is finally dead. Here's why. I can't tell if this is sarcastic or, genuine, earnest.
I mean, they've had a lot of box office flops, so could be genuine.
It could be. We don't know. This is one of those ideas that keeps coming back around, and every time I am the guy going, I don't think so. I think it's going to be all right. There's too many billions of dollars at stake. It's going to be all right. People say Marvel's dead. I'm like, I don't think so. I wouldn't
say Marvel is dead, but I mean...
Well, if Disney's dead, Marvel's dead. So, unless they sell Marvel off, which they won't. If you guys haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button, bell icon, all notifications, vote this up, let YouTube know you're enjoying what you're watching. While you're subscribing and upvoting, subscribe to Film Theorist. There's a link in the description below if you want to click on that, give the original an upvote, and subscribe to him from there. Here we go.
Disney is dying, and it's easy to see why. Between the back-to-back flops, burning money to supply Disney Plus, and films that just miss the mark, Disney is in trouble. But today, I've got the solution, and the answer that the House of Mouse is looking for is right here on YouTube.
Sure, there's a board meeting. What did Film Theorists say?
Hello, Internet.
That would be interesting.
Welcome to Film Theory, the show that won't charge you $27 million a year to fix your problems. How's that for cost savings there, Bob Iger? Have you noticed that a lot of movies have bombed recently? Fast X underperformed. The Flash is looking like it'll lose $200 million to Warner Brothers, making it the biggest comic book movie bomb ever. Even objectively great films like Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning 1 fell short of expectations this summer. But the biggest victim of the box office bloodbath for the last 2 years has got to be our mouse-eared overlords at Walt Disney Corp. Doctor Strange 2, Thor 3, and Black Panther 2 all came in under expectations. The Little Mermaid vastly underperformed. Both Ant-Man 3 and the new Indiana Jones were also costly losers. No one even remembers Disney's last animated feature film, Strange World, and Elemental had the lowest opening of any modern Pixar film ever, including Lightyear, the massive bomb that was released right before it. The long and short of all of this, things are bad at the House of Mouse right now. Disney shares are at the lowest that they've been since COVID hit back in March of 2020, and to turn it all around, they're considering selling off their TV businesses, spinning off ESPN, laying off thousands of employees. We are truly witnessing the death of the Disney empire happening in real time right now. But I think that there's a way to fix things, and the key to it all is YouTube. So grab your popcorn as I prepare to tell you a story far more compelling than anything's put out over the last few years. It's time to fix Disney in 3 easy steps.
There is this theory that's been floating around about why these films are not being as well received. I think that it's a confluence of issues. Everyone tries to point it towards one specific idea. Quantumania, I don't know why it didn't make as much money. In theory, that should have performed exceptionally, just because I think the first two did very, very well. And Paul Rudd is, a big draw. He's very likable. Irrespective of what you feel about the film, because I wasn't happy with it, but maybe bad reviews are enough for people to be dissuaded because you're spending a lot of money to go to the theater.
When the first 2 Ant-Man films came out, there was no Disney Plus. Streaming was not where it is today.
That's true as well.
People have a lot more options. And right now, the MCU, I feel like phases 1 through 3, you had to be there. It was oh my God, the new Marvel movie. And now when it comes out, it's there's a new Marvel movie. I hope it's good.
Let's talk more about that Disney dilemma, shall we? Basically, when you break it all down, Disney's problems largely boil down to 3 major topics: streaming, budget, and story. So let's go through them point by point, starting with streaming. One thing that everyone tends to overlook when they first start a streaming service is that you need a steady flow of content to make it work, to keep people hooked on the platform.
Yeah.
And making content tends to be expensive. Hence the elongated merch push they just went through. But even if you thread the needle and manage to solve both of those issues, making lots of content for a relatively cheap price, it just opens a well of new issues that are more difficult to solve. Let me explain. To prevent people from bouncing off the platform, most of Disney's star studios have been relegated to content factories to feed the Disney Plus machine. In 2020, Disney held an Investor Day presentation where they had Marvel and Lucasfilm announce 10 projects each, and Pixar announced another 6.
Insane.
It wasn't all streaming focused, but a whole lot of it was. In addition, the service has been flooded with Disney dipping into all its other major IPs. Live-action remakes of Peter Pan, serialized versions of High School Musical, the return of nostalgic classics like Willow, and the launch of anticipated new IP like Artemis Fowl. Disney owns some of the most beloved IP on the planet, and they've been pulling it all off the shelves to try and keep their content offering on Disney Plus robust and, most importantly, sticky, to keep all those finicky streaming audiences that are quick to cancel a subscription. Despite it being difficult and expensive to stay on that online content treadmill, At least on the surface, it looks like Disney managed to thread the needle. But in achieving that, they've actually exposed themselves to a problem that's far worse: brand dilution. There's no arguing that pretty much every single one of these cherished franchises has become significantly less special over the last 5 years, simply because there's just so much of them around at this point. Toy Story 4, Lightyear, Toy Story 5? You can only go to the pump so many times before the audience can smell a shameless cash grab. Going back to those Investor Day announcements, most of the Star Wars ones, they were quietly canceled. A completely different Episode 9, a Boba Fett solo movie, a trilogy from Rian Johnson, another trilogy from the Game of Thrones guys. When something new from Star Wars gets announced at this point, there's little trust that it's ever gonna see the light of day, and even less trust that it's gonna be good. Andor, for instance, it was legitimately great.
I still
Seriously, it was
haven't
the
seen
single best thing that Star Wars has
It's
produced
awesome.
in years. But you know
so
why no one watched it?
awesome.
Because it was buried under a slew of underwhelming projects like the Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, late season Mandalorian, and Episode 9.
I don't care what anyone
People
says,
lost
I
trust
like
with the
Book of
brand,
Boba
and
Fett.
as a result, deprioritized watching all the new stuff that was rolling out. The MCU is having the exact same issue right now. Look at this. Phase 1 had 746 minutes of content spread over 5 years.
Wow.
Phase 2, 757 minutes spread over 3 years. And then you had Phase 3 at 1,500 minutes spread over
damn.
another 3 years.
That's a
That was
lot
a
of
pretty
time.
significant jump, but it was nothing compared to Phase 4. Thanks in part to the introduction of Disney Plus and the requirement for streaming content, Phase 4 had a staggering 3,500 minutes
My
spread
God.
across only 2 years. There's been more MCU content in the last 2 years than the preceding 12 combined. A Marvel release used to feel like an event, like you had to see it. Nowadays, though, it's quite literally a weekly occurrence, so of course people are going to be less excited for new installments like Secret Invasion, regardless of their quality. Don't worry, we're going to address the quality here in a second. What's worse, in their drive to Disney Plus, the mouse has lost out on a lot of money they probably didn't need to. Looking at the list of original films created and released by Disney, so many of them are going straight to Disney Plus without making any money in a theater. This year alone, across all their studios, 6 of the 14 Disney films so far have premiered directly on Disney Plus or Hulu with no additional cost. In 2022, a whopping 27 premiered on streaming and only 16 were in theaters. Now compare all that to 2018, the year before Disney Plus launched, where Disney released only 10 films total, all of which obviously went to the theaters. Not only do these streaming premieres mean that they're losing a lot of money from the theatrical window, but it becomes an even bigger issue when you combine it with our next major problem: budgeting. The budgets for so many modern blockbusters,
Yeah, they're
and
out of
especially
control.
those made by Disney, are just out of control.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny cost $300 million to make. Guardians 3 and The Little
stupid.
Mermaid, $250 million each. Quantumania, a cool $200 mil. They even spent $150 million on Haunted Mansion. Why would you spend $150 million on a Haunted Mansion movie? And the true number is probably more like $300 million if
Because
you
of
include the
marketing.
marketing for
Yeah.
it. Even Disney's animation wing isn't safe. Both Encanto and Strange World cost somewhere between $135 and $180 million to make, while almost all of Pixar's latest releases put their budgets between $150 and $200 in range. Now, you might be looking at all those numbers and thinking, wow, that's a lot, but aren't all movies super expensive? And the answer is yes, but also no. Yeah, they cost hundreds of millions of dollars, but not that many hundreds of millions of dollars.
During the 90s, at the golden era of Disney animation, you had like your once a year huge release, like The Lion King, Aladdin, Little Mermaid, etc. We're talking about big budget stuff, like The Rock was a big budget film, Armageddon was a big budget film, right? I think that's tied to Disney, if I'm not mistaken.
Again, I know this is 2016, but like Deadpool, I think the budget, I could be totally wrong if I am, please. Make me look like an idiot in the comments. I believe the budget was somewhere in the 65 to 80 mil range, somewhere in that neighborhood. That film made a ton of money on, even though that's still a ton of money in terms of budget, nothing compared to this. So the point I'm trying to make is I would love it if they get back to budgets that are somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 100 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. Focus on quality, focus on not being VFX heavy like crazy all the time. Just maybe do the James Cameron and Steven Spielberg, incorporate practical and CGI. Just not these out of control budgets. You're just putting yourselves in such a hole. Because how many, like again, for me, movies like Avengers Endgame and those event films, Dark Knight, I went to see those films 5, 10, 8, whatever. Like, I'm not going to the theater that many times, not with everything that is available to me now.
Of blockbusters currently in theaters, most are not looking like this. Oppenheimer had a massive cast and incredible experimental filmmaking techniques, and it cost just $100 million to make. John Wick 4, elaborate action sequences with top-tier stunt work and incredible set designs at multiple real-world locations, also cost just $100 million. Barbie is the biggest movie of the summer. It has iconic art direction, detailed fictional worlds with real sets, and A-list actors who enjoyed being there, and it was made for less than $150 million. Over on the animation side, the newly released Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie cost $70 million, while Puss in Boots: The Last Wish and Across the Spider-Verse and the Super Mario Brothers movie were all at about $100 million each.
go.
All of these are half to a third of what Disney is paying to make their movies, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that it's a lot easier to get back what you put in when you're only $70 million in the hole as opposed to $200 million. All of this begs the question of why though? Why are these movies so expensive? Well, it's complicated and it ultimately comes down to a lot of different factors. An over-reliance on CGI, a push to develop new technologies, writing that just doesn't keep budgets in mind.
Yeah, I think the writing is a big factor. Like Indiana Jones in particular had a lot of reshoots, and it's like you have to have a solid plan at the beginning to like as a roadmap for what's ahead. And if you're scrambling because of audience reaction to hear, it's like you got to just commit, dude. You have this idea, you got to commit with that and move forward. I feel like a lot of this comes down to poor planning because there's a rush to like, oh, we got to make this release date in order to make money, and then you end up hurting yourselves because you're not going in with a strong plan.
Yeah, and it's part of movies. They do reshoots, but I think the point you're trying to make is you're not committing to your plan. You're reacting to what people are, whether it's from the trailers or whether it's from early pictures from set, whatever, or it's, oh my God, it's a female that's taking over Indiana, and then you're just like not committing to what you're doing. As you're saying, you're reacting rather than being proactive in having a solid storyline and plan, and that's costing you right there because I can't imagine the cost of reshoots is extraordinary.
Right.
One of the biggest contributors to the inflation of a movie's budget over at Disney that a lot of people don't talk about are reshoots. A reshoot is where a film brings back the cast and crew to refilm scenes that didn't work, or to film new scenes that become needed as they get into the editing process. Don't get me wrong, reshoots are a perfectly normal part of production, and they can really help bring a movie together. A lot of very successful films have had reshoots. Back to the Future, E.T., Rocky, that's not the sort of stuff I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is when a movie studio sees the rough cut of a movie, gets cold feet, and then suddenly decides they basically need to start over from scratch. Probably the most famous example of this was with Zack Snyder's Justice League, but Disney, they too have been guilty of this a lot lately. Most publicly with Solo: A Star Wars Story. Originally, that movie was directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, the two guys behind Spider-Verse and the Lego Movie. But Disney didn't like what they saw, and so they hired Ron Howard to reshoot an estimated 80% of the movie, thereby doubling its budget to somewhere around $300 million.
Wow.
Now, as we all know, Solo did not do super well. It only grossed about $400 million worldwide. A number that suddenly becomes a lot less painful to look at if your original budget was just $125 million. But all the streaming and budgeting changes in the world are going to be useless if they continue to fail at our third main point, story. So many Disney films lately have been failing at making a story that's both worth telling and that audiences want to hear. Disney keeps hoping that you can still slap a brand name onto something and it'll sell, but that just doesn't work anymore. Audiences aren't stupid. They can tell when a story is being told just because the bean counters think it's gonna make money. Like, who asked for Zootopia 2, Frozen 3, Inside Out 2, Toy Story 5? All of those are real movies that are happening in the near future, even though it feels like that list should be a parody. But making unnecessary sequels is just the tip of the iceberg. Disney also doesn't understand where their stories fit anymore.
With regards to the animation sequels, animation typically will bring in a lot of money. I mean, you look at something like Kung Fu Panda, they made a ton of those, right? But like those are usually well received. And so I think that with Frozen, the second one was well received. And so doing a third one in theory should yield good results. I can't remember the other ones he mentioned just now.
Zootopia 2, Toy Story 5, and Inside Out 2.
Toy Story, all of them have made money. Inside Out made money. Zootopia, I believe, made money. So it makes sense to try to, attack sequels for those films.
Yes, those films have done well. But Pixar and all that, I mean, they're just not in a good place right now in terms of what have you done for me lately. I'm just saying that's people are like that. And hey, you know what? I might check it out. I'll wait till it comes on streaming and give it a shot when it comes there. I'm not going to spend my hard-earned money to the theater and going to let myself down again.
Sure. Yeah, no, I get it. I would probably go watch Toy Story 5 and Zootopia 2.
Produced a dozen new characters and 10,000 years of backstory into a 2-hour film. Why wasn't this a Disney Plus series that could have given the concept time to breathe? Meanwhile, they're clearly stretching out stories that don't need to be TV shows. The Obi-Wan series is a great example of this. There was a really strong core narrative there about Obi-Wan's relationship to Vader that ultimately got buried under the bloatware of side quests and subplots. And hey, wouldn't you know it, Obi-Wan was originally written to be a 2-hour film that they decided to turn into a 6-hour your series. If you want a super recent example, Secret Invasion, which, man, I have no idea what Marvel was thinking on this one. Let's take this iconic storyline from the comics with an Avengers-level threat and adapt it into a spy thriller with basically no spying, no thrills, and no Avengers. What should have been this amazing tentpole moment in the Avengers line of films, I mean, who doesn't love themselves a good imposter storyline, became yet another piece of wasted potential content to further dilute the MCU brand on Disney+. And again, here's the problem when you start dumping out a lot of content all at once just to keep us on the digital treadmill. People start to see patterns, they see the trends, the formulas that you're using. For example, why have so many big tentpole Disney releases lately had a main character becoming jaded just because they lost a loved one? It happened with Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, Indiana Jones, Obi-Wan Kenobi, heck, even Haunted Mansion and Secret Invasion, which you probably shouldn't know because why would you ever bother to see those things? This generation of stories has seen our fictional heroes become miserable. And let's be real, that is not something that fans want to see. We fell in love with these characters for a reason. They inspired us for a reason. Seeing them crushed under the same depression of reality that we real people face every day is not fun. Sure, it might be more realistic to see a disillusioned Indiana Jones, but audiences go to the movies to escape from reality, to believe in something better, something greater, to have something to hope for and aspire to. And Disney is no longer providing those hopeful messages. So that's a lot of doom and gloom, right? Is there any way that Disney, and really the entire film industry, can fix all these issues?
It's an interesting point he brings up because so many films are gearing more and more towards that kind of realistic narrative for some odd reason, or just like trying to bring in realistic elements. It's like, stop doing that. Haven't you learned anything from the success of RRR? Like, people want to escape for a bit and just have some fucking fun. Just like allow people to escape the theater and have fun. Stop trying to bring in all this real shit. That was my, you haven't seen it yet, but that was my one criticism of Barbie. It's like I enjoyed the escapist elements of the film far more than the other elements. I'm like, that other stuff I would have been fine without. I just like the escapism of the film.
Yeah, depending on what the film subject matter is, I'm totally with you. Like, I go to films to escape reality, to watch Superman fly in the sky and stop bad guys. I don't want to like be preached to or anything like that.
Actually, all you gotta do, treat it like a YouTube channel. What I mean to say is that they need to program their slate of movies just like you do a YouTube channel. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret here, loyal theorists. We spend a lot of time thinking about what theories we put up across all the different channels, with multiple weekly meetings trying to figure out what would work best where, planning out when things should go up, and what videos complement each other, all for the overall health of the business. You can't just throw up a video willy-nilly and hope everything goes well these days. No, you need to make sure that you have solid videos here and there to keep the system and your viewers happy. And everything we talked about today with Disney are things that regularly come up in our day-to-day conversations about how to run things here at Theorist. First of all, we have a quality bar that episodes just have to hit. Otherwise, they're not going to get made. Our primary metric in the success or failure of a video isn't revenue, it's actually you, the community. Could we make more money by pumping out more episodes every week? Probably. But in the process, we would burn you out. And by necessity, dilute the show as we greenlight worse and worse episodes. See, in YouTube analytics, they give you a handy little chart ranking your most recent releases from 1 to 10 in terms of how well it's performing. Well, ideally, every upload you do is going to be a 1 out of 10. That's just not realistic to have that sort of expectation. In the end, something is inevitably going to be a 10 out of 10. And if you're good at what you do, you know when those 9s and 10s are going to hit, and so you have to surround that low performer with stuff that you know is going to do well. Otherwise, you risk taking L after L after L, and you start making a narrative about how bad your stuff is now, how much it's fallen off, or worse, the algorithm decides that people no longer care about your channel. Apply this concept to Disney, and you immediately see what they have to do with their IP. When you have back-to-back-to-back-to-back disappointments line up, like in Marvel's recent roster, it creates a downward spiral that's pretty hard to break in the public consciousness. But if you mix in 1 or 2 goods with the bad strategically, suddenly it's much harder to craft a doom and gloom narrative. Here's an example programming lineup: Multiverse of Madness, Wakanda Forever, Guardians 3, Love and Thunder, Quantumania. That looks a lot different from what really happened, where Guardians 3 appeared at the end. The real release order gave you 4 disappointments in a row before you got a small pick-me-up with the generally well-received Guardians. But if Guardians had been in the middle, the disappointments are suddenly broken up. There's a gap there. The lackluster movies on either side of it, it's just a franchise coasting along waiting for the next big event. In fact, I could make this programming lineup even better if Wakanda Forever had actually been first in the list. The mediocre performance of Wakanda actually was made significantly worse by the disappointment of Multiverse of Madness that came directly before. Had it come before Doctor Strange, that movie wouldn't have been saddled with all the extra scrutiny of, is Marvel losing its way? If Wakanda Forever isn't good, it means it's the end of Marvel, thereby leading to a different cultural conversation around it. Release order matters when it comes to shaping the narrative around your brand, and it matters a lot.
That is a good point, but like, this is like Captain Hindsight to me. I don't think anybody really knew how Wakanda Forever was going to be received, how Doctor Strange was going to be received. Guardians of the Galaxy might have been the only one that was safe.
Yeah.
Because so many people wanted James Gunn back to do the Guardians, third installment, and people love Guardians. That was the only surefire one.
Yes.
Where Doctor Strange it kind of hinged on your familiarity with the Disney Plus show. WandaVision. And then Thor Love and Thunder, I feel like on paper that was also a sure hit. I liked it still. I know there's a number of you guys who hate it, and I get why. And that is probably a contributing factor to why it was not received as well. I still enjoyed it for what it was, but I enjoyed Wakanda Forever as well. I thought that was actually a really good film.
The same thing holds true for any experimental episodes. Disney needs to be making films about new IP, like Pixar's Elio, or lesser-known characters like Marvel's Moon Knight. But obviously those projects are going to be risky, so you balance that risk out by putting them between other projects you expect to do well. Your Toy Story 5s, your Avengers, your Guardians. This accomplishes three things all at once. You mitigate your risk, you spread out the quote-unquote cash grabs, and you potentially find your next explosive IP. Again, let's look at film theory for an example. On this channel, we have a few relatively sure things. Our tentpole programming, analog horror, Spider-Man, nostalgic kids shows. And knowing that, we're able to put the stuff that we're not sure about between them. And then if something surprises you and it does manage to explode, bam! You have yourself a new strong subject to slot other unknowns in between. That is literally what happened to us with the Backrooms. We weren't sure how that one was gonna do, and it ended up doing gangbusters, with people wanting more and more of our analysis videos while they wear their new absurdly comfortable theory wear hazmat puffer jackets. The gamble paid off, and it paid off in a big way, but we also know that we can't release too many of those things in too quick of succession.
Dilute it.
We can't release a Backrooms theory every single week, because even though they'll do well, people will eventually stop caring if we do too much, and they'll stop coming back because we're no longer adding anything to the conversation. Does that sound familiar, Star Wars? How about you, Marvel? Can you relate? And just in general, when running a YouTube channel, you gotta know what episode ideas are gonna work best as shorts and which ones merit a full video. We don't try to take something that's clearly a short and then bloat it into a full 15-minute video, or vice versa. Just like Disney shouldn't be looking at something that's clearly an hour-and-a-half movie and trying to turn it into a 10-episode miniseries just so they get more watch minutes on their streaming app. Content needs to fit where it tells the best story. Lastly, in terms of our budgeting, we have to make sure that an episode can make back the money that we're spending on making it, paying the writers and editors that are working on it, and we budget it just based on the AdSense we expect to make from that video. Anything extra that we get from brand deals or merch sales or whatever is a nice plus. It allows us to expand the team, to do more ambitious projects, but we can't budget every single video that way because eventually we're gonna lose that bet, and we can't run the business anymore. Think of our AdSense like your box office, Disney. Sure, every now and then we could do a more expensive video, something that takes a bit more time, or just invest in a passion project. That's gonna be maybe a once or twice a year thing, not an every release thing. Disney, you can't keep releasing $300 million movie after $300 million movie without knowing that you're gonna earn that back at the box office. Budget according to what you know you're gonna earn in the theaters. That way, all the ancillary stuff, that's all gravy. Anything you earn on top of that, boom, it's a bonus. You became that much more profitable.
Isn't it possible that this idea he's talking about of how to approach what films to do is what informs the conversation at the beginning stages? With Disney stuff, you're dealing with a lot more moving parts. Just a lot of shit.
A lot of cooks in the kitchen.
There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And so when you finally, when it finally reaches the audience, it's like it's gone through a whole process that is way more complicated than a YouTube channel. I understand what Film Theorist is talking about. When you're making a channel like CinePals or Film Theorist or whatever, it's like, it's kind of easier to find out what the conversation in the zeitgeist is and bank on that.
So I'm not saying I disagree with you, because what they're doing in the film industry in terms of films obviously cost way more than our operation here. It's not even close. But I think what my issue is on like he's saying, in terms of you're just diluting it by doing so much, but they're not learning their lesson. They keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over. It's like, when are you gonna learn?
You know what's gonna help with that? Fixing your reshoot issue. Let me tell you, as I was researching this episode, just as someone running a media company, my jaw hit the floor when I saw how often companies like Disney are doing reshoots that majorly overhaul the movie. How are you rolling on day one without having a clear vision that the writers, directors, producers, and studio have all agreed to? At Theorist, we don't do an episode unless all of our senior creative team are on the same page about what that episode's gonna be. And more importantly, when we work with brands, we require that every single stakeholder review and lock the script before shooting begins. That way, no one can ask for a last-minute change. We learned early that those reshoots and re-edits cost a fortune, killing our process. But by forcing everyone to get on the same page early, even if it's painful and slows the process down a bit at the beginning, it saves so much time, money, and a ton of headaches on the other, much more expensive end of the production process. All in all, in their desperate bid to try to catch up to Netflix with their streaming service, throwing money at their problems in hopes that they'll go away, Disney lost sight of what made entertainment work since the very beginning. Making what you can, making what you're good at, keeping it on budget, and telling a story that's worth telling. And if we here on YouTube can do it, they have no excuse. Or if they can't get their act together, maybe the death of Disney was ultimately for the best.
I want to make one more point. Getting back to Star Wars really quick, I remember when Force Awakens came out. I know that you weren't the biggest fan of that film. When you were one of the few who wasn't a big fan. I loved Force Awakens, although there were some things that I would have wanted, like all three of them together, for instance. And anyways, the point I'm trying to make is I remember when that came out, and I personally thought, okay, they have a clear vision here where they're going. And when you see the other two episodes, you're like, I guess they didn't have a clear vision in any way, shape, or form. And I remember you at the time, like, I don't like this. I'm not liking the direction we're going here. And you guys just watch. And I remember I'm like, no, I don't think so, Anthony. I think I really like this one. I like the direction. Other than not seeing the three of them together, I like this direction. I ate my words very badly on that one. But it's insane to me how you go into these things with hey, we've got an IP. The crowd's going to come. We're good.
It has a lot to do with pleasing your shareholders. That's what it comes down to. That's the bottom line. Is like, we got to show year over year we're making profit for the shareholders. That's ultimately what the problem is here. I think that Disney can borrow from Nintendo. Nintendo, as frustrating as it is, they don't take a loss on anything. Like the Wii U and the Virtual Boy are the two lessons that they learned pretty hard. But like, if you look at their stuff, they're never putting out a system where they're going to take a loss. Like the Switch was already underpowered when it came out, but it's done crazy numbers. The games always stay at freaking $50-$60 because they put everything into those games, generally speaking, so that they can hold that value throughout the shelf life. Like when Tears of the Kingdom came out, Breath of the Wild was still selling at $50-$60. So basically, it's the same thing that the film theorists is saying, which is you gotta keep it under budget. Like you gotta lead with quality over quantity. Yeah. And you gotta have a cohesive plan at the start, in order to tell the best story possible that's gonna resonate with as many people. Yeah. It's a difficult time though, and I get the struggle because like a 6-second attention span kind of era where people are moving on to the next thing and it's very fleeting. And I was just listening to Conan O'Brien talk to Roy Wood Jr. about how after pandemic, people are just as content to listen to some, Joe with a phone as they would with a proper host with a studio and a live audience. It's the same to them. And it's like the game has completely changed. And so what passes for content is totally different. And Disney is fighting to keep your attention. It's a crazy time we live in. And I hope that Disney is able to find their way forward because they own a lot of shit. If Disney goes down, there's a lot that goes down at the same time. Yeah. You guys, thanks so much for hanging out. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Let us know your feelings in the comments below. I'm Jabby Kawai. This is
Andrew Flash Gordon.
Peace out.